Okay, we are back for part 2. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, we are swatching out my entire Daniel Smith watercolor collection. There are 71 paints in my collection at the moment, and so we've done all the yellows, the oranges, the earthy yellows, earthy browns, and the reds, and we've just moved into the purples. So we are going to continue. First up for this video, we have Perylene Violet, which is PV29. This is a beautiful sort of warmer purple colour, very red leaning, but I absolutely love this shade. It's beautiful for mixes, it's great for darkening your greens. I prefer it to a dioxazine violet, or in Daniel Smith's case they call theirs Carbazole violet, which is coming up. But yeah, I do love this colour. I don't use it as much as I'd like to, but I do really enjoy it. And then next up we have Naphthamide Maroon, which is PR171. It's very similar to Perylene Violet in hue. Like, actually I find these two are pretty interchangeable. I said maybe the Naphthamide Maroon is a little bit on the cooler side, but for all intents and purposes they may as well be the same. And you definitely don't need both on your palette. Then next up we have Ultramarine Violet. This is a fairly light tinting strength colour, typically granulating, and it's a very sort of blue violet. Again, I only have a half pan of this one. There's not much to say about that one. It's a nice purple. It can make some nice granulating mixtures because it's quite a low tinting strength. It doesn't overtake in a mixture, but you can use it to get some of that granulation into your paint. Next up we have Carbazole Violet, which is, according to the website, PV23, which is the same as Dioxazine Violet, but this is apparently the red shade. It's still very blue to me. It's very dark, almost black in the mass tone. But as you thin it out, you can see lovely rich purple violet colour. It's a fairly transparent colour, but because it's so dark it's hard to read the writing under there. It's a very traditional colour to have on a palette. Next up we have Purpurite, which is probably one of my favourite of the Daniel Smith colours. It's another one from their Primatech range, so it doesn't have specific pigments, but it's a granulating sort of warm purple, so it fits the bill for the things that I like. And it's quite like an earthy purple, so it's more purple, it's more of a brighter, I guess, purple than Moonglow, but it has that granulation without the colour separation, which sometimes you might not want the colour separation. So similar hue, just a little bit brighter, not quite as dark as Moonglow. Okay, now we're moving on to our greens. We've got, first up we have Phthalo Green Blue shade. Again, I only have a half pan of this pigment. It's PG7. It's a very common, I'm pretty sure everyone has had this colour on their palette at some point or another. Some brands will call this emerald green, some call it phthalo green, some call it viridian. Original actual Viridian is PG18 and it's a granulating colour. So if you have a PG7 Viridian, it's a hue. It's not the original Viridian pigment. Next up we have Deep Sap Green, which I really like. It's a nice dark green colour. It's PB27, which is Prussian blue, PY3, which is that has the yellow light, and PO48, which is that quinacridone burnt orange. I like it as a nice dark green. Then next up we have Undersea Green, which is another fan favourite of Daniel Smith's unique mixes. This is made up of PB29, Ultramarine Blue, PY150, Nickel Azo Yellow, and PO48. So because of that ultramarine blue, it will granulate and separate a little bit. Again, it depends how much water you use, and it can also depend on the paper. So we shall see how it works on here. It's that very sort of nice earthy, mossy green. Very natural looking green. A couple of drops. Next up we have Hooker's Green. This is not a colour I enjoy very much at all. I rarely use it. I only have this half pan. It's PY3, Hansa Yellow Lights, PG36, which is Phthalo Green Yellow shade, PY150, Nickel Azo Yellow, and PO48, Quinacridone Burnt Orange. So now, if my understanding is correct, and Sap Green will be the same when we get to it, these greens that have PY150 and PO48 in them would have previously had the original Quinacridone Gold pigment when that was in production. And then once that went out of production, Daniel Smith replaced the PO49 with the new Quinacridone Gold mixture, PY150 and PO48. That's just a bit too garish of a green. It would need to be knocked back to be more natural looking. I would never use this green straight out of the pan like this. It's just too bright. Right, next up we have Sap Green. So again, this one is PO48, PY150 and PG7. So again, it would have been the original Quinacridone Gold with the Phthalo Green blue shade before, but now it's the new Quinacridone Gold with the Phthalo Green blue shade. Again, it's that very sort of natural, warmer green, which is my favourites. The kind of cool greens I like are like this deep, oh, well you can't see it, it's like the Deep Sap Green. It's the more sort of foresty green colour rather than the garish bright greens of like a Hooker's Green. Alright, next up we have Green Apatite, which is another Primatech colour. This one has some really interesting granulation. I used to really like this one, but then I found it less and less usable for my kind of painting in terms of the colour separation, and granulation was just a bit too, I don't know, not quite what I was looking for. This worked as a alternative to Sap Green on my palette, but it has quite a strong brown granulation that separates out. Put some clean water in there. Next up we have Olive Green. The Daniel Smith version of Olive Green is fairly new to me. I haven't had it for too long. It's a mixture of PBR7, PB29, which is ultramarine blue. I don't know which version of PBR7 it is, maybe it's like a raw sienna, and PY97, which is Hansa Yellow medium. So it's again very earthy, sort of dirty green sort of colour, which I quite like. Then next up we have Serpentine Genuine, or Serpentine, which is another Primatech color, and this one again I used to really like, and it would take the place of an olive green on my palette. You see it's very similar to that olive green color, but again it has a very strong granulation, which I don't know, it just wasn't my cup of tea after a while. And I love granulating paints, don't get me wrong, but for some reason this one and the green apatite just weren't it after a while. I don't know, I think it's this garish green that comes out in the green apatite that I don't like, and then again this one has a really strong brown granulation as well, which in some uses could be really good, but I don't know, I haven't found too many where I liked it. Next up we have Green Gold. This is made up of PY150, that Nicolazo yellow, PY3, Hansa Yellow Light, and PG36, which is phthalo blue, so it's phthalo green yellow shade. You really see that Nicolazo yellow shining through. Now, a lot of brands don't also offer a green gold, but it's a single pigment version. Daniel Smith calls that one Rich Green Gold, which is PY129. So again, if you're looking for a green gold in other brands, it's not going to be the same as Daniel Smith's green gold. It will be very similar, or more likely it will be the same as Daniel Smith's Rich Green Gold, which is sort of like mustardy, dirty green yellow color. Again, this is great for mixing greens. Even though it's a yellow pigment, it has a very green sort of undertone. Oftentimes, instead of having a cool lemon yellow on my palette, I would have this instead. Because the only reason I would need a lemon yellow is for mixing brighter greens, and Rich Green Gold mixes better greens in my opinion, more natural greens than a lemon yellow would. So, it's my opinion, my preference, which I'm sharing. Next up we have Cascade Green, which is another one of Daniel Smith's beautifully unique granulating colours. This one I do like. It's a mixture of PBR7, which I think is meant to be like a raw sienna type PBR7, I don't know which one, and PB15, which is a phthalo blue. More of that pigment on there. This one separates out and granulates beautifully as well. You get a really lovely sort of turquoise granulation coming off of it. We'll see how that separates out in a bit. A couple of clean drops. Next up we have Cobalt Teal Blue, which is PG50 by Daniel Smith. This color can go by a few different names: Cobalt Teal, Cobalt Teal Blue, sometimes it's even called Cobalt Turquoise, although there is another color called Cobalt Turquoise coming up after, so there can be a bit of confusion, but you're looking for that PG50 pigment, or some brands use PB28. Either way, both are cobalt pigments. They granulate beautifully, they make beautiful mixes. It's just a lovely colour to have, and I love using it on my palette. This one's a very granulating version. It's also a more green leaning version than some of the others. I have some variations of this pigment or this colour that are a lot more blue leaning. Next up we have Daniel Smith's Cobalt Turquoise, and this is PB36. So this is a darker, slightly more muted version of the Cobalt Teal Blue. It granulates similarly, it's another cobalt pigment, and it's beautiful in its own right as well. This one's a beautiful one for like seascapes. Okay, I'm just going to wait for these two pages to fully dry before we carry on with the last couple of pages. Okay, back now with the final set of colours, mostly blues into some darks at the end. So starting off we have Manganese Blue Hue, which they say is only a PB15, but there's definitely something else going on than just because PB15 is a phthalo blue, which is typically a much stronger colour than just this. But anyway, there's the original Manganese Blue is PB33, I believe, and it's not really produced anymore because it's a very toxic pigment, and so most companies offer hue variations of this. I think the only commercially available version of Manganese Blue, which has the original in it, is by Da Vinci, but it's a mixture including the original pigment. And then there are some handmade watercolor artists who or handmade watercolor makers rather, who still have a stash of the original PB33 pigment, and they offer an original Manganese Blue, which is a granulating color, I believe. So I'm not sure if this one's going to granulate now, I can't remember. Then next up we have Cerulean, which is PB35, and this is just the regular old Cerulean, which is a fairly low tinting strength. Colour favoured amongst artists for painting skies, lightly granulating. Yeah, it's not my favourite version. Oh jeez, oh my god. Whew. Sorry, it was just a really strong gust of wind that just blew my window open. Scared the living daylights out of me. Okie dokie. Right, let's sort that out. Okay, next up we have Cerulean Blue Chromium, which is PB36, and this is my preferred hue of cerulean. It's slightly stronger, slightly more pigmented. I say pigmented, it's slightly richer, more saturated, that's the word. It still granulates beautifully, and it's a very similar hue in the wash. So I can still get that sort of nice light cerulean blue colour, but I have the option of having a darker version as well. Next up we have Phthalo Turquoise, which is a mixture of PB15 and PG36, that's phthalo blue and phthalo green yellow shade. Daniel Smith do have a traditional phthalo turquoise, they call it phthalo blue turquoise, which is a PB16. This is a really interesting version of this colour rather. It's definitely more green leaning, and it's a beautiful mixer as well. I don't know, I used to be really into the phthalos when I first started out, but I've sort of veered away from phthalo colours a bit recently in my work. They can be quite overpowering sometimes. Next up we have Phthalo Blue Green shade, and I believe this is the cool blue that's included in the Daniel Smith Ultimate Mixing Set. Which again works as a really good sort of primary cyan sort of colour in a modern cyan, magenta, yellow colour mixing trio. Then next up we have Phthalo Blue Red shade. This is not a colour I particularly enjoy, I only have a half pan of it. It's, I don't know, not a fan of the red shade. It's just that slight bit warmer than the green shade. It's a good alternative if you want something similar in hue to an ultramarine, but you don't want the granulation. Next up we have French Ultramarine, which is a very sort of traditional warm blue, and it is the warm blue included in the Daniel Smith Ultimate Mixing Set. Sorry, is it Essentials Beginners Essentials Mixing Set? That's the one. It's also in the Ultimate Mixing Set that was curated by Jane Blundell. But it's a nice granulating warm blue. Again, makes beautiful mixes, beautiful granulating mixes, colour separating mixes, all of that stuff. Next up we have Prussian Blue. It's probably one of my favourite blues. Again, it has questionable light fastness issues, but it's a beautiful blue, and I like using this as my cool blue. It's a very green leaning blue, but again makes absolutely gorgeous mixes, and it's just beautiful on its own. Nothing more to say about that one. Then next up we have Indanthrone Blue, PB60. Sorry, did I say Prussian Blue is PB27? But it is. Indanthrone is PB60. I also really love this colour. I love this as my warm blue alternative to French Ultramarine. It's a nice dark as well. However, I'm not the biggest fan of the Daniel Smith version of this colour. It goes down beautifully and it's a nice vibrant colour, but it has a real drying shift and it ends up looking really dull when dry compared to some other versions of this colour. I really like the Sennelier version and the M. Graham version of Indanthrone Blue. I think M. Graham calls theirs Anthraquinone Blue, but it's absolutely stunning, that version. Alright, the last few colours. Next up we have Mine Blue. It's one of Daniel Smith's Primatech colours. This is the worst one for re-wetting. It literally dries like a rock, and I even pre-wet it, so I don't know, so hopefully we'll get some sort of decent colour off of it, but I don't have the tube of this anymore. It's just such a hard one to re-wet. Alright, definitely pre-wetting it was useful, was good. But even with that and lots of scrubbing, it doesn't give off that much pigment. So yeah, unfortunately, as much as I like the hue of it, it's a beautiful shade of blue. I find it really hard to justify keeping it on my palette because it's so hard to re-wet, and it needs to be re-wettable for me to put it on my palette. I don't use watercolours fresh from the tube that often. But yeah, and it can be a bit streaky as well when you re-wet it. I don't know. The formulation just isn't right for me. Next up we have Mayan Dark Blue. This is PB82. I don't think I've seen another brand offering this particular pigment. At least not this version of it, in this darkness. It's beautifully dark, inky, it's almost like an indigo. But again, this one has some questionable light fastness, which could cause issues, I guess, depending on what you do with your work. But I definitely need to play around with this one more. I still have a tube of it, so I should definitely pull this out and put it in a palette in place of like an indigo, especially for a palette that I want to use mostly in my sketchbook. I think this would be a really good alternative to indigo. I don't have the Daniel Smith indigo. Again, it's not my favourite version from the stock card, so I never got it. But this is a really beautiful dark blue. Alright, next up we have Lunar Blue, and this is one of my favourite Daniel Smith blues. It's a more unique mixture. I don't think another brand offers this sort of mix or this colour. It's a mixture of PBK 11, which is a lunar black or oxide black. It's a very granulating black colour, and PB 15, which is a phthalo blue. Now, I believe Kimberly Crick did a video on this, and she's theorised that the PB 15 in this blend is actually the manganese blue hue version of PB 15 and not a straight up phthalo blue, because of how bright the blue is in the granulation when it granulates out. And it's a beautiful granulating colour. here and there. Next up we have Sodalite, another Primatech colour. This one is also absolutely stunning, really lovely dark inky blue, similar to like a indigo again, or a Payne's grey, like a bluish Payne's grey, and it granulates beautifully. Again, it's another favourite. I tend to go for this one on my palette more, I think, than I do the Mayan Dark Blue, but they're fairly similar. I'd say the Sodalite's a little bit warmer, whereas the Mayan Dark Blue is a bit more green leaning. So that would be something interesting. I don't think I'd need both on a palette, but it would be nice to have one of them. Next up we have Payne's Grey, and this is Daniel Smith's normal, I guess just Payne's Grey. They have a Payne's Blue Grey as well, which is slightly more blue leaning. But this is just a mixture of PBK9, which is a black, along with PB29, which is ultramarine blue. So just a black and blue pigment. It is a little bit bluish, but not as blue as the bluish version, I guess. I definitely prefer my Payne's Greys to be on the blue side of things. That's again personal preference. Next up we have Jane's Grey. Just make sure I've got... Oh wait, no, that wasn't... Did I get stuff mixed? Did I just swatch Sodalite twice? I think I did. This one's Payne's Grey. Yeah. Alright, I swatched Sodalite twice by accident, so I'm just going to do a quick little swatch of Payne's Grey here. Thankfully I have a bit of space at the end here so we can scooch everything over by one. Okay, so that's the Payne's Grey. Yeah, I did think to myself the Payne's Grey by Daniel Smith is definitely more grey than blue. I think that was a bit odd. Okay, then next up we have Jane's Grey, which is PBR7, which I believe that's a burnt sienna version, and PB29. So this mixture is a very classic mix that a lot of people do. Sorry, touched the Payne's Grey there. It's a very sort of classic mixture. Again, I only have the half pan of this. It came in the job lot I got. Next up we have Hematite, which is another Primatech. It's a heavily granulating sort of grey-black pigment. This one's a bit more brown leaning, but it's definitely more of a warmer black colour. And finally, you can see that granulation coming through already on that one. We have Black Tourmaline, which is another Primatech colour. This one isn't a super strong colour, this one's a lot of granulation. The black isn't super dark or strong, it's more of a grey, but it does have quite a strong granulation to it, if I remember correctly. So it seems the Hematite's definitely a stronger granulator at the moment, but we shall see. This one's not re-wetting super easily. Okay, that's all of those colours. Apologies for the mix up with the Sodalite and Payne's Grey. I'm going to let these dry out and then we'll come back and take a look at the swatches. Okay, so we are back now. The swatches have all dried. So starting off at the beginning with the Perylene Violet, Naphthalmide Maroon, like I said, very similar colours. I'd say maybe the Perylene Violet's a bit darker in the mass tone compared to the Naphthalmide Maroon. but that could have also just been how I applied the paint. That ultramarine violet is nice and granulating. The Carbazole violet, again, super dark, but not my favourite shade. Purpurite, very granulating, love that colour. Phthalo green blue shade, very traditional colour, great mixer, not one I would use on its own. Then I absolutely love these next two colours, Deep Sap Green and, or I think it's actually called Sap Green Deep, and Undersea Green. And with the Undersea Green you can see some of that granulation, colour separation with the blue coming out. It's very subtle on this paper, but it is there. Hooker's Green, not my favourite, not by a long shot. And then Sap Green, which I absolutely love as sort of like my go-to green. I can make it darker, I can make it lighter. It's just a really good mid-green that I love having on my palette. Green Apatite, super strong granulation, not a fan of that almost fluorescent green in the granulation along with that brown. It's just not my favorite thing. Olive Green, love it. There's some mild granulation in the mass tone in the darker parts, but not too much. Serpentine, again, it's okay, not my favorite. Green Gold, really lovely, love the brightness of that green gold. Rich Green Gold, again, a beautiful mixer, not one I would use massively on its own, but one I have on my palette a lot because it's great for mixing. Cascade Green is fairly new to me, but I absolutely love the granulation of it. It creates some wonderful mixes and it's just a really fun colour to play with. And then Cobalt Teal Blue and Cobalt Turquoise, beautiful granulators, great in mixes, beautiful on their own, just love those colours. And then more blues. So Mayan Blue Hue, nice granulation there. Cerulean and Cerulean Blue Chromium both granulate beautifully. Again, like I said, the Chromium version is definitely my favourite because it's richer mass tone, richer pigmentation, just more saturated, but you can also get those lighter washes that you can get with regular cerulean. Phthalo Turquoise is just an interesting version of this colour that I don't see other brands offering. It's a greener version, which I quite like. Then we have the Phthalo Blues, green shade and red shade. Not a fan of red shade, prefer green shade, but generally not a fan of Phthalos at the moment. I mean, I don't really reach for them. I have other colours I prefer to use in their place. French Ultramarine, great mixer, beautiful granulator, a very traditional colour to have on your palette. Not one I often reach for on its own, but it's one I use in mixes. Prussian Blue, this is my favourite blue, my preferred green shade blue if I'm going to have a green shade blue on my palette. Indian Throne Blue, love this colour, just not this version. Mayan Blue, Primatech colour, dries like a rock, really hard to re-wet. Would not recommend this unless you want to use it fresh from the tube. Mayan Dark Blue, really beautiful sort of inky indigo blue colour, need to try and use that more. Lunar Blue and Sodalite, beautiful granulators, beautiful colours, love using them. And then this one here is Payne's Grey. I had made a mistake here, so ignore this one, it's a repeat of Sodalite. Payne's Grey is this one. Not my favourite version of Payne's Grey. And Jane's Grey, which is just a mix of Burnt Sienna and Ultramarine. Again, a very classic mix that a lot of artists do anyway on their palette, so Daniel Smith had put together a convenience version of it. And then Hematite and Black Tourmaline. Hematite's definitely a warmer, highly granulating black, whereas Black Tourmaline's a more neutral, highly granulating black. Although on this paper it looks like the Hematite is more granulating than the Black Tourmaline, but both are very granulating and both are from the Primatech range. So that's everything for all the colours. Thank you for joining me for this little two-part swatching series of my Daniel Smith colours. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed having a closer look at some of these Daniel Smith colours. And yeah, like I said in the first part, if there's any of these colours that you would like to purchase, my links are down below for you to use if you'd like. It helps me out. They are affiliate links. It just means I get a small commission if you purchase anything after clicking through. Doesn't cost you anything extra, and if it's your first time ordering from Jackson's, you get 10% off as well. Alright, thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you guys again soon. Take care. Bye!